we're in Leviticus 19, and it's answering the question, what does holiness look like? And a lot of the things that Leviticus 19 starts out with, if we want to know what holiness looks like, we need to look at three primary things. One of them, the first thing, is the character of God, who He is and what His nature is like. The second is the person of Yeshua. And then the third is obedience to His Torah, obedience to His command. These three things really tell us what does holiness look like. And so starting with verse 1 of chapter 19, it says, Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to all the congregation of Bnei Israel and tell them, You shall be kedoshim, for I, Adonai your God, am holy. And what's interesting about this is, it's the kedoshim, it's plural. It's speaking to them as a nation. It's speaking to them as a people. Does that mean that we as individuals don't need to worry about being holy? No. It's got to start individually for the entire nation to be holy, right? It's got to start with us as a person in order to be holy as a nation. And we quote that 2 Chronicles passage all the time about if my people who are called by my name, y'all know that one, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, right? So in order for them to do that as an entire nation and for the entire land to experience His healing, then we have to start as an individual family or an individual person, but it's also all of us together as a people. And we are a holy people because He is kadosh, singular, as He is in Himself holy. He needs nothing else for Him to be holy. He is holy because that is His nature, that is all that He is. Holiness is the defining characteristic of God. It is His, what kind of love does He have? It's holy. It's a holy love. What kind of anger does He have? Isn't it a holy anger? All right. What kind of jealousy does He have? It's holy. His judgments, all of them are holy, and all of those are quite contrasted to us, because our love is not always holy. Our jealousy is not always holy. Our anger is not always holy. Our judgments are not always holy, but His always and forever will be, no matter what, they will be holy, because that is who He is. Everything about Him is holy, set apart, pure, and undefiled by anything but. We read about this in Isaiah. One called out to another, talking about the seraphim, the angels there at the temple. And they called out, Holy, holy, holy is Adonai Tzavaot. The whole earth is full of His glory. That repeating it 3 times, y'all know that's emphasizing His holiness to the point of you can't get any greater, you can't get any more. There is nothing that compares to Him. He is holy, to where the whole earth, whether we see it or recognize it or not, is full of His glory. And isn't that something that we're looking forward to? Isn't His glory filling the earth something that we will one day see in our future? So the whole earth is filling of His glory. That's one of the places that He's taking us. That's one of the places that He wants to show us as His people. Isaiah 43 says, I am Adonai, your Holy One, the Creator of Israel, your King. So again, His holiness, it defines Him as the Creator. As the nation even, His holiness defines Him as the King. There has not been a holy king yet. Not like Him. There's been some good kings. Is that the exception or is that the rule? That's the exception, to even have a good king. But He will be a holy king. Right? He says in Isaiah 57, "For thus says the high and exalted one who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in a high and holy place, yet also with a contrite and humble spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble and revive the heart of the contrite." So his name is holy. His identity, because your entire being and identity is wrapped up in your name and who you are, what you are called. So his name is holy, and he dwells. This is his living place, is a high and set apart place, a place where you can't just walk into. But does that stop him? Does his holiness stop him from being around those who are contrite and humble, those who have repented? Does his holiness, is God so far distant from us that he can have absolutely no contact with us? Right? That's what a lot of groups and teachings have been out there over the years. Deism and parts of Islam and all these other things say that he is unknowable to us, and he wants no contact with us at all. And yet he is able, in spite of his holiness, or in his holiness, to be with the humble and the contrite in spirit. So the character of God, his name is holy. And the thing about holiness is he defines what holiness is. He defines that. He established what it means, what qualifies as holy, what holiness is, and also what holiness is not. And in that statement from Leviticus 19, where he says, "You shall be kedoshim, you shall be holy, for I, Adonai, your God, am holy," he is inviting us to be like him. He is inviting us to, he authorizes us to share his character. He authorizes us to share in his nature. Can you imagine that? I mean, he wants us to be like him. You know, all the other mythologies, all the other gods, you know, the gods don't want human beings to be anything like them. They want to, they're the servants, they're the slaves, they're the lower, they don't have anything in common really at all. And yet he is inviting his people to be like him. You know, we typically talk about losing our innocence back in Genesis chapter 3. We talk about losing our innocence at the fall. But in reality, we lost our holiness. We lost what he had made us to be. He made us good. We were therefore holy because he made us, but we became corrupted, we became defiled, our beauty faded, you know, death and destruction were added to us. But that idea of being holy is a picture of who he has always wanted us to be, because that he made us in his image. He made us like him. And it's so not only is it who he always has wanted us to be, but it's also a picture of who he wants us to be in the future. It's who he will make us to be in the future. Look at Ephesians chapter 1. So he chose us in the Messiah before the foundation of the world. So from the very beginning, he chose us from the very beginning to be holy and blameless before him. So from the start, this is what he wanted for us. The Father created us to be holy because he had a special calling for us to fulfill. 2 Timothy chapter 1, it says, he has saved us and called us with what kind of a calling? It's a holy calling. Not because of our deeds, but because of his own purpose and grace. This grace was given to us in Messiah Yeshua before time began. So from the very beginning, we not only were to be holy, but we also had a holy calling to fulfill, to be a part of, that he wanted us to do. And in the fall, we lost our ability to fulfill that. We lost our ability to do that, to participate in that, because we lost our innocence, yes, but we lost the holiness that he created us with. And so, because of that, we need his grace given to us in Messiah Yeshua. We need that given back to us or restored to us so that we can come back to this holy calling that has always been there for us. Does that make sense so far? Right? 1 Peter says, instead, just like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves also in everything you do. For it is written, Kedoshim you shall be, for I am Kadosh. I am holy. Peter, so this whole thing about be holy, for I am holy, that's not just a Jewish thing, is it? No. It is for all those who call upon Messiah, all those who believe in Him, all those who trust in Him, all those who are saved have this same calling, because He is calling us to be holy because that's who He is. It is for every person who calls on Him and has been saved through Messiah. So why does the Father want us to be like Him? Why does He want us to be holy? For one, because that reflects His glory. But, it's also because that's really the only way we can be close to Him. That's the only way we can be in His presence. We are not holy now, but Yeshua has given us grace. He has covered over our sin, and the Father sees His holiness. Because we have the Spirit of God living in us, what is one of the roles and functions of the Spirit of God? Isn't not to make us holy? Is it not to sanctify us, set us apart, and all those things? So with this holiness that has been added to us, with this holiness that has been given to us and covering over our sin, this holiness is then going to one day be made permanent and never to be removed again. That's the glorification process. So at salvation, our sin is covered and our holiness is added to us. Through the work of the Spirit and the sanctification, holiness is being grown in us, and because of the glorification process, then that holiness is restored to us permanently. That's what He has for us. That's because that's who He is. That's who He created us to be like Him, to be holy as He is holy. And so that's one way that we see what holiness is by His character and His nature. Holiness also looks like the person of Yeshua. I'm missing a slide. Yeshua is the walking, talking, living example of what holiness is. If it were not so, He could not be the sinless Messiah. He could not be one, echad, with the Father. So if Yeshua were not holy in both His human and His divine nature, we would not be able to see the Father in Him. Yeshua, with every step that He took on the planet, was holy. Everything He did was holy. Yeshua said to Him, this is John 14, He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So if you have come to know me, you will know my Father also. From now on you do know Him and have seen Him. And Philip said to Him, Master, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. And Yeshua said to him, have I been with you for so long a time, and you haven't come to know me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? The words I say to you I don't speak on my own, but the Father dwelling in me does His works. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. So when we look, when we see Yeshua, we see the Father. And in seeing and looking upon Yeshua, we are also looking and seeing the holiness of God at work. Yeshua's actions, His behavior, and even His words, the things that He taught, are all going to be consistent with. They're all going to be in line with the Father's holiness. There is no way that Yeshua could ever teach against or undo any of the Father's commands, because if He ever did anything like that, then they would not be echad. They would not be one. So as we read about Yeshua, as we read through the Gospels, as we see how He interacts with people, how He treats them, what He said about the things of God, how He related to the Torah, how He related to the feasts, the temple, the Sabbath, In every way, he is showing holiness in what it looks like. In every way, he is demonstrating that for us in every way possible. So for us, this is the danger that we get into. For us to say that he then gives us permission to act differently toward those things, toward the Sabbath, toward the feast, toward his Torah and all those things. If he gives us permission to act differently towards those things, we're basically saying that he gives us permission to be unholy. If all of his actions are holy, and we say we don't have to because he did, then we have permission to be unholy. Does that sound consistent with who he is? No. It's not consistent at all. He would never give us permission to be unholy. And so we have that call to holiness just as he is. 1 John chapter 2 says, "Now we know that we have come to know him by this, if we keep his commands. The one who says, 'I have come to know him,' and does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him." Again, this is saying you don't have permission to be unholy. "But whoever keeps his word, in him the love of God is truly made perfect, and we know that we are in him by this, whoever claims to abide in him must" do what? Walk, just as he walked. So how he acted is the way we're supposed to act. What he did is what we're supposed to do. How he responded to people, how he reacted to and lived under the Torah, how he responded and did everything in relation to the word of his Father. We're supposed to live that way as well. We're supposed to walk just as he walked. And so if we walk as he walked and follow in his footsteps, we're going to be walking in holiness and what holiness looks like. It's a way of life. It's a highway for the redeemed. And Yeshua is on that highway. He's directing and welcoming traffic on it. And he removes the hazards and all those things that don't belong there. That's how he talks about it in Isaiah 35. A highway will be there as a roadway. It will be called the way of holiness. Right? The unclean will not travel on it. It is for the one who walks the way. Fools will not go astray. No lion will be there. No ravenous beast will go up upon it. They will not be found there, but the redeemed will walk there. The ransomed of Adonai will return and come to Zion with singing, with everlasting joy upon their heads. They will obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. In light of what we sang earlier about the call to return home, the call back to Zion and such, we got to understand that he is making a way for us. He is making the path straight for us to return to him and to his ways. It's that pathway of peace, the pathway of shalom for his people. And so he is inviting us to walk in that way, to walk along that path. And is it a broad path or is it a narrow path? It's narrow. Narrow, for something to be narrow means it's excluding a lot of other things. So the narrow path is the set apart path. The narrow path is the one that is the holy path. That is what he has called us to and how he has called us to live. So if we want to know what holiness looks like, we look to the character of God. We also look to the person of Yeshua, how he lived, how he responded, how he acted. We also need to look at the commands that he gave us. Because holiness looks like obedience to his commands. That's what holiness looks like. His commandments, essentially, his commands are holiness in action when they are lived out. Okay? That's what his commands really are. His commands are consistent with his character and nature, and they are the way that Yeshua lived and walked. And he did so. Yeshua lived and walked in his commands without turning to the right or to the left. He was holy in all the Torah that required of him. Everything that the Torah required of him, he did. Correct? Because if he didn't, what would that make him? As someone who was then breaking Torah. He was one that would become a sinner. All right? So all that the Torah required of him, he did. And Yeshua was never being a legalist in doing them. I mean, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't have the nerve to call Yeshua a legalist for keeping the Torah. That would be kind of bold on our part. Say, Yeshua, you don't need to do that. That's being legalistic. Yeah, you go ahead and try to have that conversation. But it's in his Torah that we know what holiness looks like and what the right way is. We've looked at Psalm 19. We've quoted this passage a few weeks. The Torah of Adonai is perfect and totally legalistic. Is that what it says? No. It's restoring our soul. The testimony out of Adonai is trustworthy, making the simple wise. The precepts of Adonai are right, giving joy to the heart. Usually when we talk about his teachings, his precepts, his Torah, we don't talk about it in terms of joy, do we? Our culture, traditional understanding, does not talk about it in terms of joy. It talks about it in terms of hardship, of burden, of difficulty, of legalism, and all those other kinds of things. But this is what it's always supposed to be. It's supposed to be joy. The commands, the mitzvot of Adonai are pure, giving light to the eyes. The fear of Adonai is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of Adonai are true and altogether righteous. They are more desirable than gold. Yes, more than much pure gold. They are sweeter than honey and drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them your servant is warned, and in keeping them there is great reward. So by his Torah, by his commands, we are warned. Warned about what?
What sin is.
Yeah, what sin is, what the narrow way is, what holiness looks like. The command of being holy because he is holy. If you start straying from the things that he teaches and what he says, then you're getting away from his holiness. And you don't want to do that. Psalm 119 says, "Blessed are those whose way is blameless, who walk in the Torah of Adonai." That's a perfect description of Yeshua. His way was blameless because he was walking in the Torah of Adonai. Now, did that prevent people from accusing him? No. Especially by people who weren't blameless themselves. They like to act like they were blameless, but they were not. But we are blessed when we walk in the Torah of Adonai. It says, "Happy are those who keep his testimonies, who seek him with a whole heart, who also do no injustice, but walk in his ways." So walking in his Torah also has blessing. It brings joy. There's that concept again. It also has practical examples of lived out in life, and we'll get more into this in just a minute. It goes on in verse 9. It says, "How can a young man keep his way pure?" And I don't think it's talking about just young men, because I think it's a call to men and women. But how can a young man keep his way pure? By guarding it, guarding the way according to your word. With my whole heart I have sought you. Let me not stray from your mitzvot, your commands. I have treasured your word in my heart. For what reason? So I may not sin against you. Right? So that I might not sin against you. We treasure it in our heart because by this we know what sin is and what path to stay away from. It defines holiness for us so we can stay on that highway of holiness. He says, "Blessed are you, Adonai, teach me your statutes." Walking in his Torah is the way of holiness for that believers, that the redeemed, that the people of God are called to walk in. So his Torah, his word, his scriptures are supposed to define All of our experiences, all of our relationships are supposed to be put under or lived under and lived out by His Word. Leviticus 19, this is where this passage is. The heart of the Torah is this call to holiness. And the first statement given after "Be holy, for I am holy," is the very first relationship we know and understand in this world. Y'all know who it's with? Each one of you is to respect, honor his mother and his father. Every relationship we have, no relationship really comes before this. This is the first one that we know, first one that we understand, the first one we'll remember. And it defines how we move through life for pretty much the rest of our life. If we are abandoned as a child, does that affect us for the rest of our life? If we grow up without love and affection, does that affect us for the rest of our life? Yes, it most certainly does. So the very first relationship that we experience, so that of our mother and our father, defines how we move through the rest of life. If you cannot show honor to them whom you can see, you're going to have a lot more harder time showing honor to your heavenly Father whom you cannot see. You're even going to have a harder time showing honor and respect to other people whom you can see. Holiness looks like someone who honors his father and mother, and by learning from them, ideally at least, learning from them, we learn how to worship God. They are supposed to provide the example of what worshiping God is. And a lot of kids learn that example from their parents of how to worship God maybe the wrong way or not worship Him at all, because He's not a priority. But ideally, as you respect your mother and your father, you're going to learn what it means to worship God. And the first lesson, the most important lesson that your father or mother is supposed to teach you is about the Shabbat. You learn what it means to worship God. They are the examples of that. They model that for you of how, and the thing that happens most often in the life of a family is the Sabbath. It's the feasts. They come maybe once a year. And over the course of one's childhood, if you stay at home for 18 years, how many times have you done Passover with your mother and father?
18.
About 18 times. How many times have you done Shabbat?
52 times 18.
52 times a year times 18. Anybody who's really smart can figure that out. I'm not gonna, because I'm not that smart. But, so you've done Shabbat a whole lot more than you've done anything else with them. They are our examples, and they are supposed to model for us what that means. They also are to model the feast days and all those other types of things. But Shabbat is what you see most often. This is one of the reasons why making the break from Christmas and Easter, all these other holidays, is so hard, is because that's how your parents taught you how to worship. That's, as far as breaking away from those things, that is so difficult, because it's that sense of, this is what they instilled in me. And it's almost as if it feels like we're disrespecting our heritage, disrespecting our father and mother by no longer practicing and worshiping in that way. This is one of the things that makes it so hard. It's one of the sources of our greatest disconnect, though. This is the thing. It's one of the sources of our greatest disconnect from His Word, because the enemy has been able to pass on the wrong Sabbath. He's been able to pass on the wrong holidays. Things that might be fun and enjoyable on some level, but they don't convey His holiness, because they're not there in His Word. This is a holiness issue. This is not a salvation issue. This is a holiness issue. And see, the rest of the chapter deals with areas of life in which practical examples of what living in holiness is explained. Obedience to his Torah and his commands shows up in how you worship God and what is the right way to do that. It also shows up in how you treat others. Does that sound like a familiar construction? Okay, because we went through this earlier. One of the Torah scholars came, this is Mark chapter 12, heard them debating. Seeing that Yeshua had answered them well, he asked him, which commandment is first of all? And Yeshua answered him, the first is, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. We talked about this last night at the dinner. What does this establish? First off, it establishes his identity. His sovereignty, absolutely. It establishes who he is and what his nature is. We've got to hear this. This is part. The other Gospels, when Yeshua is asked this question, the other Gospels don't have this beginning of including the Shema. Only Mark does. But when we quote this passage, when we in the church are saying, what's the greatest commandment? Where do we always go? We skip this part and just go straight to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Why? Because we want to define those terms. We want to define what it means to love him. We want to define what it means in our heart and all that stuff, whereas this verse establishes that he does that. It establishes that we have to hear from him what it means to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. He says, you shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. So holiness, when you're looking at holiness in terms of the worship of God, if you're in Leviticus 19, let's look at some of these. The first thing that's mentioned about worshiping God correctly in terms of holiness is what?
Sabbath.
You keep the Sabbath. And the Sabbath is in verse 3. Each one of you is to respect your father, his father and his mother, and keep my Shabbatot. I am Adonai your God. And in case you missed it, in verse 3, look over in verse 30. He says, you are to keep my Sabbaths, my Shabbatot, and reverence my sanctuary. I am Adonai. That's about how we worship God. Holiness, it's repeated in here twice. The heart of the Torah, it's mentioned in here twice about keeping the Sabbath. Verse 4, in holiness and worship of God, do not turn to idols or make molten gods for yourselves. I am Adonai your God. Again, that's a statement. I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt. These are all the things that he starts with in identifying who he is. All right? In verse 5, holiness and worship of God is, you follow the sacrifice protocols correctly and the eating of the offerings and things like that. You don't let it go and sit around until it gets rotten. And if it does sit around for too long, you burn it. Right? You follow these protocols correctly. Verse 12, he said, we don't profane his name. We're not to swear by my name falsely, and so profane the name of your God. I am Adonai. All right? And you're also you're supposed to worship him in all that you have. That's down in verse 24 and such. 23, he says, when you come into the land and have planted all kinds of trees for food, you are to consider their fruit as forbidden. 3 years it will be forbidden for you. It is not to be eaten. Then in the 4th year, all its fruit will be holy for giving praise to Adonai. And in the 5th year, you may eat its fruit. so it will yield its increase to you. I am Adonai, your God. So worship, even in what we come to possess or what we come to grow in, all those types of things. Holiness in the worship of God, there's no consumption or use of blood, which was a very common practice in the other cultures. They would also use it for enchantment, making spells and sorcery and things like that. That's not supposed to define worship of Him. They're not supposed to try to worship in order to manipulate or control Him. Verse 27 and 28, is talking about not marking your body to look like what the other gods demand of theirs. It's talking about the rounding off of the hair, the side of your head. You're not to mar the edge of your beard. You're not to make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, or any tattoo marks, those types of things. That's not what holiness worship is supposed to look like. And I know a lot of people that have tattoos and things like that. This is not it's about where you are and where you're going, not where you've been. But once we come to know that, then you have to make a choice about how you're going to live. He says, don't seek counsel from anyone but Him. That's verse 31. He says, do not turn to those who are mediums or to soothsayers. Do not seek them out to be defiled by them. I am Adonai, your God. All right? He is the only one that we're supposed to go to. He's the only one that is supposed to provide us the answers for what's coming, for what is in life, or which way we should go. We shouldn't go to any of these other things that try to give us wisdom on what decisions we should make or whatever else. We struggle with that a lot in this culture. And then we're also just supposed to observe all of His statutes and His ordinances and do them. That's verse 37. He says, you must observe all of my statutes and all of my ordinances and do them. I am Adonai. Right? So that's in the worship of God, we can express holiness. We can express holiness in the way we treat other people. Starting with our father and our mother. We've talked about that one. Verse 9, the corners and gleanings of the fields. Backing up into that, when he says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you are not to reap the very corners of your field, nor are you to gather the gleanings of your harvest. You are not to pick the remnants of your vineyard, nor are you to gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. Instead, you are to leave them for the poor and for the outsider, because I am Adonai, your God. Does He care about the poor and the outsider? Yes. His holiness cares about the poor and the outsider. That's something of His character and His nature. And if you blow them off, then are you acting in a holy way or an unholy way? We're acting unholy. So holiness can be expressed in how we treat others and what we leave for them. If we were just concerned about ourselves in this example, we would take everything and keep it for ourselves so we can get all that we can out of it. We would we wouldn't cut the corners. We would take everything from the corners. We would go back over the field again and pick up every piece that we possibly could and leave nothing. And He's saying that reflects a heart that is not holy. He talks about not lying or stealing or deceiving in verse 11. And if you're not doing those things, if you're not stealing, lying, or deceiving, what should you be doing? You could be giving instead of taking, right? You could be, instead of lying, what should you be doing? Speaking the truth. Instead of deceiving, what should you be doing? Again, truth. Truth is at the heart of that. You're being honest with each other. He talks about not oppressing, not robbing or withholding payment. That's verse 13. He says, you are not to oppress your neighbor nor rob him. The wages of a hired servant are not to remain with you all night until the morning. So instead, of not doing those things, if we're not supposed to oppress, what should we do instead? Should we maybe welcome or help lift up? If we're not robbing, where again we can give, we can express holiness in this. If we're not supposed to withhold the payment of work that's been done, then you pay the person their wage the day that they earn it, or when they earn it. That expresses holiness. And then verse 14 is how you treat the disabled. It says, you are not to curse the deaf, nor put any stumbling block before the blind, but you shall fear your God. I am Adonai. If someone is deaf and you're cursing them, are they ever going to hear it? No. They're never going to hear that you have cursed them. Does God know? Yeah. If you put a stumbling block in front of the blind person, they're going to learn, or they're going to figure out pretty quick that somebody put something in front of them, because they're going to fall on it. It's going to potentially hurt them. So if we are not doing those kind of things to the disabled, what should we be doing instead? Shouldn't we be about helping them and being a part of their life and helping them navigate through things that are difficult for them? Verse 15, talking about no injustice or favoritism. Rather, we should be showing fairness or justice, because that is the character and the heart of God. You are to do no injustice in judgment. You are not to be partial toward the poor, nor show favoritism toward the great. Instead, but you are to judge your neighbor with fairness, whether they are poor or rich, whether they can give something to you and benefit you, or they can't. You are to do what is right by them and not show favoritism, or not show injustice. We're not supposed to spread false stories or gossip or things like that, which he compares to endangering life. That's verse 16. You are not to go up and down as a talebearer among your people. You are not to endanger the life of your neighbor. I am Adonai. If you tell a story about somebody who has done something, that you make up something about him stealing from you or attacking you or doing something else, what could happen to him? Somebody might go try to exact justice on your behalf. Right? If you say that somebody has done something terrible, somebody might try to fix the situation. And if it's just a lie, a false accusation, have we been seeing that in the world, in the politics and all those other kind of things? Can one accusation affect an entire nation? Yeah, it sure can. Failure to rebuke a neighbor. Verse 17, he says, you are not to hate your brother in your heart. Instead, you are to firmly rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. So we're not supposed to hate, and that's a good thing. But sometimes your neighbor may still not be the best person. They may still need to be rebuked. And if you don't do it, you don't really care about who they are. You don't really care about which direction they're going. You don't really care about their life. So can you speak the truth in love to a person who's going in the wrong direction? Yes, that is showing holiness. Can you do that from an arrogant and a haughty spirit and self-righteous? Sure you can. That's pretty easy. But can you still speak the truth in love and rebuke in a way that is holy and honoring to God? Yes. Does that guarantee it's going to be received that way? No. If only. But he says failure to rebuke a neighbor is essentially about hating them. He talks about not having vengeance or grudges toward our neighbor. In verse 18, nor bear any grudge against the children of your people. And it's in that context that we read that phrase, which is the second greatest commandment of love your neighbor as yourself. These are all tangible, practical, daily examples of how we show love to our neighbor. And we show love in each of these ways, about not lying about them, sometimes rebuking them, not seeking vengeance, not showing favoritism. All of these things are examples of how we love our neighbor. And then it's verse 20. It's men, don't take advantage of status or power over women. That as a man, you're going to bear the greater. If there's any blame to go around in that situation, it's on you. So if you don't take advantage of status or protection or power over women, instead, what do? We protect. We protect their status. We protect their position and their honor. It goes on in verse 29, it's a very similar thing, where it says, do not defile your daughter to make her a prostitute. So you are uplifting the honor of your daughter, rather than let culture decide that you can just throw it around whenever you want. Verse 31, you seek truth from God for you and your life. That's that whole thing about seeking the mediums and the spiritists and all those things. You don't need to go to those things. You're showing holiness in the way you treat others, including yourself and your family and all those things, by going to God and Him alone for which way you should go. Verse 32 is talking about honoring the older generations. That's been something that the enemy's been trying to undermine for decades, to split up and divide the generations and seek them from connecting with one another. So honor the older generations. Doing no wrong to the outsider in verse 33. If the outsider dwells with you in your land, you should do him no wrong. The outsider dwelling among you should be to you as the native born among you. You should love him as yourself, for you dwelled as outsiders in the land of Egypt. You treat him as your own. It's saying don't do this, but instead do this. We are showing and demonstrating what holiness looks like when we live that way. And then we are supposed to be honest in our judgments in all manners of business and trade. He says, verse 35, you must not be dishonest in judgment, in measurements of length, weights, or quantity. You are to have honest balances, honest weights, honest bushel measure, and an honest gallon. I am Adonai your God. So how we worship God is a matter of holiness. Is our worship consistent with His Word, or are we just kind of doing it our own way, how we like it, when we like it? That's a matter of holiness. How we treat others, going from family, poor, the disabled, to the outsider, that's also a matter of holiness. It's a reflection of His holiness. Do we honor? Do we demean? Do we harass? All of those things help us have an understanding of what is holiness. So in the question we have to ask as an individual, but we also have to look to our entire culture and our entire society. Are we holy as He is holy? Kedoshim. Are you Kedoshim? Be Kedoshim. Be holy as a people because He is holy. And see, the only way that that's going to be true for us as a nation and as a people is when He is the King that is ruling from the throne. When He truly is the heart and soul of the nation and who we are supposed to be. That's what it's all supposed to be about. His holiness, His nature, His purpose. Are we holy? Lord, Father, may we be holy as You are holy, Lord. Your ways are holy. Your ways are righteous and good. Father, your word shows us what that's supposed to look like. Help us, Lord God, to walk as you have walked. Help us to live as you have called us to live. May we be holy as an individual, as a family. And Lord, may our nation truly reflect the holiness that you have called us to. And we look forward to the day when you are truly ruling from your throne in Jerusalem. Thank you, Father, for this time together. In the name of Yeshua. Amen.